Hello, I am Enrique Sada, and this is Mexico Centered, a podcast from the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. As we have previously discussed here in Mexico Centered, immigration, particularly as it refers to the U.S.-Mexico border, has remained a contentious topic during President Trump's administration. Earlier this year, the issue became more critical for the current administration as we learned about family separations at the U.S.-Mexico border. Reports of children being separated from their families when apprehended at the border raised concerns about the conditions under which minors were being held by authorities and the procedures in place to reunite them with their parents. Beyond these reports, there is a larger phenomenon of unaccompanied minors at the border. According to a new Baker Institute report titled Alone and Vulnerable, Unaccompanied Minors in the United States and Mexico, this is part of a global trend and it is not new. I sat down with Pamela Cruz, co-author of the report, to talk about the history of unaccompanied migrant minors in Mexico and the United States, as well as what the current state of affairs is and what can be done about it. Pamela Cruz is a research analyst for the Mexico Center. Prior to joining the Mexico Center, Cruz was a research assistant on an international project analyzing the transformations of cross-border governance in North America and Europe. Her current research focuses on binational institutional development on the U.S.-Mexico border. Here's our conversation. Pamela Cruz, research analyst here at the Mexico Center. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you for the invitation, Enrique.
So I'm excited to talk about this Baker Institute report on unaccompanied minors in the United States and in Mexico. So we have heard a lot about unaccompanied minors in the news for the past year. We have heard stories about the CBP and ICE and how the conditions that these unaccompanied minors are in. But there seems to be a lot going on that it's difficult to really understand what's happening. So I'm excited to talk to you so you can help me understand this a little bit better.
Yes.
So let's start with the basic one. What is an unaccompanied minor?
Sure. So an unaccompanied alien minor or an unaccompanied minor is a U.S. legal term for a child who does not have lawful immigration status in the U.S., is under the age of 18, and lacks an available parent or legal guardian to provide care or custody. And this term also includes both children who have entered the country without a parent or legal guardian, or children who, for other reasons, have been separated from their parent or legal guardian. And by law, they must be transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement for care and custody.
So CBP takes them, and then they are transferred to this other agency.
Yeah. So when an unaccompanied child is apprehended, they need to be transferred from Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, within 72 hours.
All right. So how many unaccompanied minors are coming in? What are some of the recent figures, and who are these minors? What countries are they coming from?
Absolutely. So the overwhelming majority of unaccompanied minors apprehended in Mexico or the U.S. are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. These countries are constantly ranked as some of the most violent countries in Latin America. And these countries, have so many problems of poverty, unemployment, inequality, the presence of transnational gangs, organized crime, unemployment, impunity, structural weaknesses, and minors leave to flee these conditions. In fiscal year 2017, approximately half of all children referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, were over the age of 14 years, and over two-thirds were boys. And it's important to note, though, however, that overall undocumented apprehensions have been declining in the United States, and the unaccompanied minor apprehensions represent a very small portion of overall immigration apprehensions. In 2017, unaccompanied minors represented 13% of total undocumented apprehensions. And as of this year, fiscal year 2018, which encompasses October 2017 to August 2018, we've seen the apprehensions of unaccompanied minors to 45,704 on the southwest border.
So, yeah, 13%. So that depends on what we're talking about. It may sound low, it may sound high. When we think about unaccompanied minors, any number, I would say, seems problematic, especially if they're not being treated well. But this issue is not one that just appeared in the last couple of years, right? We may have heard more about it on the media, thanks to some rhetoric that we've been hearing, and we'll talk more about. But this has been happening before, right? Some of the pictures, for instance, that they have circulated, where children or unaccompanied minors are in this kind of like cell-like structures, that people say, well, those are back from the Obama administration, right? So this has been happening before. So how far back does it go? Can you tell me a little bit about like the numbers even back then?
Yes. So you're correct on that, Enrique. And the report that Tony and I wrote goes a little bit back in the history of unaccompanied minors in the U.S. prior to 1980, but I'm not going to get into that in this podcast. The United States has seen the arrival of unaccompanied minors long before this administration, or the Obama administration, or the Bush administration. So prior to 2003, it was the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, that was under the Department of Justice, that was the agency responsible for the care and custody of unaccompanied minors. And there was allegations of mistreatment of these minors in INS care, which led to a series of lawsuits that resulted in the Flores Agreement of 1997, which set the standards of care and treatment for these minors in INS treatment. And then after 2003, through the Homeland Security Act, INS was dissolved, and the newly created Department of Homeland Security assumed immigration responsibilities, and the care and custody of unaccompanied minors was then transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And so when you mention these, jail-like conditions, through the Flores Agreement, it kind of set a national-wide policy for the detention, release, and treatment of minors. So it moved away from the adult detention model, and it was placing minors in what is called the least restrictive settings, which is appropriate to the age and needs. And it stipulated stuff like they needed to have access to drinking water, food, toilets, sinks, medical assistance, adequate temperatures and ventilation, contact with family members that were arrested with the minor, and segregation from unrelated adults.
So in having to handle the case of this unaccompanied minors, there are some standards that they need to meet, that these agencies need to meet, right? So how is the U.S. doing currently, especially since we've heard a lot about these issues in the media, we've seen these pictures. How is the U.S. doing in terms of meeting these principles, these standards of the conditions that these unaccompanied minors have to be in?
So I think that there have been steps towards the right direction. So now with the care and custody being an ORR and HHS. So HHS operates a network of over 100 shelters in 17 states, and the responsibility is to provide a safe and healthy environment for these children. And these facilities that children are being held in are supposed to have, classroom education, mental and medical services, case management, recreation, and family reunification services. However, there's still allegations that continue in the present day that the Flores Agreement has not been fully implemented by HHS. And so when we see all of these media reports on these allegations of treatment and abuse, it sometimes is important to note that when the child is apprehended, when they're in CBP custody, transferred over to ORR, Like I said before, it usually supposed to happen within 72 hours. And for example, the American Civil Liberties Union obtained over 30,000 pages of records relating to abuses and neglect of children in Customs and Border Protection custody between 2009 and 2014. And these included allegations of intimidation, harassment, excessive force, physical and verbal abuse, refusal of medical services, denial of food and water, and improper deportation. So I think that while the U.S. has taken steps towards the right direction with larger surges of unaccompanied minors, there definitely needs to be more training, more accountability, and more oversight in place. Children or anyone else in detention should be treated with dignity and respect.
So one of the main parts of this report that got my attention was the talk about Mexico and how Mexico is itself having to handle their own situation, right, with unaccompanied minors coming into their country. Oftentimes we focused only on the United States, and because of media attention, as is expected, because it's focused on the situation here. But those who know about Mexico and immigration know that Mexico also has its own issues and its own history of not treating migrants well. What can you tell me about the Mexican case, and especially as it relates, of course, to unaccompanied minors?
Absolutely. So similar harsh conditions and abuses have been reported as well in Mexico. And various organizations have found that Mexico's enforcement of migration and refugee laws does not really correspond to the reality of how migrants are treated during their apprehension or detention. And there's different barriers that they face when it comes to, access to asylum or other protections. What we noted in our report is particularly worrisome, is the small amount of minors who seek asylum in Mexico. For example, in 2017, only 259 minors sought asylum.
Right. Yeah, I was looking at the graph that you have in the report, and you pointed out to me that there was a bar that indicated the number of those minors that had sought asylum, and I was like, I didn't even realize there was a third bar.
It's so small. You can't really even see it.
You see the number, but
see the number. I had to add the number. So it's also important to note that Mexico has taken strong border enforcement in its own southern border. For example, since the start of the Southern Border Program, which is also known as Plan Frontera Sur, in 2014, Mexico deported more than 500,000 Central Americans, which that even surpassed U.S. deportation figures in some years. And so apprehensions and deportations of unaccompanied minors also rose significantly. And for example, the Migration Policy Institute notes that in 2014, Mexico deported 77 out of every 100 minors, compared to just 3 out of 100 in the United States.
Yeah, so, well, those are definitely some interesting figures. And now, though, how are things going to move forward in Mexico? Because last July, Mexico, as we know, elected a new president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. This is the first time that a leftist party will be in power in Mexico. Andrés Manuel López Obrador and his team have taken drastically different approaches in some areas. As we know, we might talk about the airport and stuff like that, but we also know that in terms of immigration, they have said things that other governments or other parties have not said. Right? They AMLO or López Obrador, for instance, has said that he is not going to do the dirty work of the United States, which is this work of Mexico having to deal with this Central American migrants who are traveling north and things like that. So, what can you tell us about what we expect to see from López Obrador, given the rhetoric that we've heard from this incoming administration? They begin soon in December 1st.
Yeah, so we start seeing maybe that there's 2 different administrations in the U.S. and Mexico that may not be on the same page in terms of migration. And for example, the New York Times on September 12th of this year reported that the Trump administration had proposed to divert about $20 million in foreign assistance funds to Mexico in order to, to help assist in costs related to plane and bus fare to deport up to 17,000 people in Mexico unlawfully. And because of all that, media that happened afterwards, so the outgoing administration of Peña Nieto kind of issued a statement saying that we will continue to work with the United States on terms in issues relating to migration. However, the incoming administration of López Obrador reportedly rejected this offer, with Marcelo Ebrard, Mexico's incoming foreign minister, said that the Trump administration's offer for funding was, quote, not necessary. And then we have Alejandro Encinas, the incoming secretary of Mexico's ministry in charge of immigration, said to the Washington Post, "We have to stop looking at immigration as an issue of public security or national security, or the national security of the United States." So with these comments of these high-level officials, you start seeing that, Mexico and the U.S. have very different interests and views on how, one, they should treat immigrants and what's going to happen in future surges of undocumented or immigrants that are coming to Mexico and the United States.
Yeah. So in the past, in the podcast, we talked to Gil Kerlikowski, who was CBP commissioner under in the Obama administration. He was talking about how well the United States and Mexico had cooperated in many issues, and so we'll see how this change in rhetoric that we are seeing currently will play out once López Obrador takes office as president, right, and his team comes in. So you also mentioned in this report the rhetoric and how all this talk about immigration that we've been hearing, especially from President Trump himself, and echoed in some sections of the media. You say that these are distractions, that issues get conflated. Some issues that are perhaps like on the margins get put at the center of discussion, as if they were the same thing as now this problem that we have with unaccompanied minors, and so that it's difficult to sort out what's happening.
Absolutely. So I think that the use of this kind of rhetoric without any concrete facts and evidence taints the real issue here, which is vulnerable minors who are running away from these gangs and in desperate need of protection. And so, for example, in the report, we mentioned that Jeff Sessions has mentioned that MS-13, this gang, takes advantage of the Unaccompanied Minors program. But yet it's important to note that there are no official statistics on the number of unaccompanied minors involved with gangs. This is directly from the DHS website. And so the administration is relying on anecdotal evidence, which is not representative of the entire population of unaccompanied minors.
Yeah. So now we have another event that conflate this even more. It makes this more difficult to sort out, and that's the caravan, right, from Honduras that is now in Mexico and is traveling through Mexico, coming in or traveling north to the United States, to the U.S.-Mexico border. How many, do we know if there's any unaccompanied minors here, or well, they could potentially become unaccompanied minors if they are separated from their families.
Absolutely.
How can we understand this caravan in light of what we've been talking about?
So this migrant caravan at one point had grown to up to 7,000 people. And when it was at that number, the UNICEF had estimated that about 2,300 children were traveling with the migrant caravan in southern Mexico. And so now, I just was reading this morning, the caravan has been estimated to be about 3,500 people, and it's still weeks away from reaching the United States. And I've also read on media reports that about 1,700 people have already filed asylum applications in Mexico or have accepted assistance to return to their countries of origin. And so you start seeing, like we talked about, this rhetoric of this administration, has responded to this caravan by threatening to cut off foreign assistance to Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And then we've also been hearing that the Pentagon will deploy at least 5,200 active duty troops in the U.S.-Mexico border. And so I just want to say a little bit about that. The troops that are going to be at the border are, I think, only legally able to assist U.S. border officials by doing things like helping transport border agents or providing emergency medical care to those who need it. It is not a sustainable model. It is temporary. It is cruel. It is unnecessary. These are short-term solutions. And in order to create fear and misunderstanding of the reasons of why these people are fleeing, why they're trying to reach the United States, and the protections that they're entitled to under domestic and international law. So let me just say this. This is not an invasion. It's not a loophole. It is not a crime to seek asylum in the United States. It is the legal right. People need more information on how to apply to asylum, what's the process like, how long is it going to take, and not be scared into doing so.
Right. So this is a problem of the United States, there's a problem of Mexico, but there's also a problem of the region as a whole, right? There's migrants, and especially unaccompanied minors, having to migrate and flee from violence, from poverty, from gangs. In thinking how to address, you said, this is not the way to address this issue. It seems, in a way, maybe a political move, and it raises fear and gets people anxious about this, rather than see how to solve this, right? So how do you think Mexico and the U.S. can work together, especially now we said there's a new administration coming in, who knows how they were going to work together, but you mentioned in the report that this has to be not only thought of as a U.S. problem or perhaps even as a Mexico problem, but just as an issue that the region needs to address.
Yeah, so Tony and I work on a lot of issues regarding the U.S.-Mexico border, and so I've always heard in conferences and in speeches that binational problems require binational solutions, and this is also the case, except this is a regional problem that requires a regional solution. And for a strong collaborative relationship, the U.S. needs to view Mexico and Central American countries as essential partners to create an effort to create best practices and solutions to any future surges in undocumented immigration.
Well, Pamela Cruz, thank you so much for answering these questions.
Thank you, Enrique.
That was Pamela Cruz. The report, Alone and Vulnerable, Unaccompanied Minors in the United States and Mexico, co-authored by Pamela Cruz and Mexico Center Director Tony Payan, is available on our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Mexico Centered. Thanks to Lisa Waketa, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications and the 5th anniversary special edition of our newsletter. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host, and do not necessarily reflect those of the Mexico Center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at mexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and Radio Public. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.